X-Men and Alpha Flight number 2 is called The Gift Part 2, and it's a very fun issue full of philosophy and action that hits pretty much everything I love about comic books. In this issue, the heroes discover that Loki is the secret benefactor behind their new abilities, and they must decide whether to keep the powers or to give them up. Keeping the powers comes at the cost of their creative imaginations, and not only will they not be able to create anything new and original, but also all the magic from the world will be snuffed out, including the lives of their friends, Snowbird and Shaman. But keeping the powers would also bring about world peace, and all the suffering and famine and war of the world would be ended. So essentially it comes down to the lives of a few versus the lives of many, and the heroes must decide what they believe in more. This philosophical debate reminds me a lot of the Squadron Supreme miniseries from the 80s, where a bunch of superheroes decide to essentially take over the world in an effort to bring about world peace, but their rule unintentionally becomes totally totalitarian, and we get to see the fallout of what misguided good intentions can actually bring. In the case of this issue, it's pretty dark when some of the heroes are saying they're okay with sacrificing Shaman and Snowbird's lives right in front of their faces. But overall, I really enjoyed watching both sides of the argument get their time to shine. One of my favorite parts of this issue was watching the heroes debate about what to do. I love when a comic doesn't have a straightforward agenda that it's trying to promote, and instead it gets murky with ethics like it did in this one. What was funny to me was that a lot of the heroes seemed okay with sacrificing Snowbird and Shaman's lives for their powers, but as soon as it was revealed that they'd also lose their own creative spark, it became like this big scandal and everyone suddenly sided against the powers. I guess people can only be altruistic up to a point until the self-sacrifice just becomes too much to bear. Something else I really enjoyed with this issue was finally getting to see all the scientists in action. Last issue, we really only saw Madelyne and Cornucopia do their things, but here we get to watch Rock Shaper cause a cave-in, and Beastmaster control a bunch of animals, and the plant guy make a tree grow out of control. Even though I don't think we see these scientists ever again, I liked watching them give the heroes a run for their money with their newfound abilities, and it finally felt like payoff for that drawn-out introduction that we had on each of them in the first issue. This was a great conclusion to this little mini-series, and probably the better of the two issues in my opinion. There's a lot to digest in terms of philosophy and debate, but it's sequenced out really well with a lot of action that keeps the pace and the momentum of the issue going strong. I think there's a moral here about taking the easy way out and how it isn't fulfilling, or that like a quick fix can't solve the root problem or whatever. It's better to have something earned than for it to be freely given and yada yada, all that jazz. But all that aside, it still really is a great issue just in the story alone. Here are my highlights from X-Men and Alpha Flight number 2.
Talisman.
Talisman is one of my favorite characters in this issue. She comes across as one of the more level-headed characters, and she doesn't really give in to like impassioned emotions the way someone like Rachel or Kitty is prone to do. She's still a passionate character in her own way, but she's just way less likely to throw a tantrum like them. Like Rachel and Kitty, she's one of the younger kids on the team, but the way she comes across, it feels as though she's already like wiser and more mature than either of those two. When I see them all together, it almost feels like she's babysitting them, or at the very least acting like the older sister of the trio. Something I like about Talisman's character is her relationship with her father, Shaman. She's not a daddy's girl in the slightest, and in fact, she hated her father for years and years. She blames him for killing her mother back when she was a kid, even though he was just trying to heal her. But the result of her mother's death is what caused Talisman to cut ties with Shaman and become estranged from him for like 15 years. She only ever came back to him basically because she needed help with her abilities and stuff. So now that it's Shaman who's the one on his deathbed, it's interesting watching Talisman start to feel a bit remorseful about how she's been treating him all these years. She knows that Shaman never meant to kill her mother, but she can't help how she feels with the situation, and she chose to blame him for it. But now with him dying, and with her seeing how shaken up Rachel is over her own family drama, it finally starts to hammer home to Talisman that perhaps it's time to bury the hatchet and let the grudge go. From a character perspective, anger can be a pretty one-note personality trait that can only carry a character's personality for so long. So even though we don't really see Talisman in many of the X books, I can already get a sense that there's been some sort of development here in her character through this ordeal, and I like watching her inch forward toward forgiveness and reconciliation with her father, instead of just saying mad forever and ever.
Kitty Pryde.
Kitty is so very Kitty in this issue. She's impetuous, she's brave, she's a good friend. She's everything that's both endearing and frustrating about her character. There are 3 big moments for her that stand out for me in this issue. The first is when she's hunting through the caves with Talisman looking for Rachel. These 2 characters don't really know each other, at all at this point, so there's something nice in just seeing how Kitty behaves like a colleague to a relative stranger. Kitty's always so hung up on her emotions that it's really refreshing to see her behave with a regular sense of general civility without being overly exaggerated in either happiness or sadness or anger. But more to the point, I think she does a great job of talking Rachel off the ledge, so to speak, when they do find her. Of all characters, I would never peg Kitty as the one to be able to calm people down, but it's exactly what she does, and she helps Rachel see that just because this timeline isn't turning out the way she expected to, it doesn't mean that it's still not one worth living in. I also think that during the cave-in, Kitty does a great job of exemplifying leadership and sacrifice. It's pretty par of the course for an X-Man to put themselves into harm's way for the greater good, but Kitty is certainly a character who does that more often than not, and here she does it for Rachel to safely phase her through the falling rocks. It's not really a flashy save, but at this point, Kitty still doesn't really have mastery over her powers, so phasing herself and Rachel and blindly stumbling through rocks until she reaches the chasm is not something to scoff at. And I think her pushing herself to her edge like this is just further evidence of why she belongs on the X-Men and not the New Mutants. Not that we needed any further evidence by now. Kitty's second big moment for me is when she's talking to Wolverine after Madelyne heals him of his berserker rage. By now, Kitty knows that something's up with the scientists, and even though she kind of insults Wolvie by insinuating that he's not up to snuff without his animal instincts, she brings up a good point in that with them, the scientist Beastmaster probably controlled him and took him off the path of finding Snowbird. The Beastmaster can control animals, and if Wolverine was part animal, then that means the Beastmaster could control him. Wolverine can't remember anything after having initially set out to find Snowbird, including even coming back to the palace in the first place. So Kitty's deduction here that mind control is what happened to him is really the only possible explanation. Kitty's final big standout moment for me comes during the big philosophical debate. Some of her friends, like Rachel and Colossus, have already drawn the line in the sand and decided that the lives of a few is the small price to pay for the peace of many, and Kitty just can't believe what she's hearing. She's kind of like one of the most vocal of the anti-fire fountain side, and really, this is Kitty in her most emotional state all issue long. She lays into Colossus, totally disgusted that he would say what he's saying, and confronts him, asking if he would still believe what he's saying if it was his magical loved ones whose lives were on the line, like Nightcrawler's girlfriend Amanda Sefton and his own demon sorceress sister Ileana. It's pretty obvious by Colossus's reaction that she shamed him with her little speech, and honestly, good for her. Colossus and Kitty were still kind of freshly broken up at this point, but honestly, if they hadn't already been broken up and they were still in their relationship, I think this little moment would have been the deal breaker for Kitty.
Wolverine.
Wolverine is the first character to really start turning the tides for things inside the Golden Palace. After Madelyne removes his berserker rage, he goes back out to find Snowbird, and he finds her all right, but she's on her literal deathbed and just wants to be left alone to die. Of course, Wolverine isn't going to let that happen, so he goes to save her, but before he can help her, he's interrupted by Beastmaster and Pathfinder, who are the 2 scientists that went out with him last issue to help find Snowbird in the first place. They are here to kill Snowbird, and they literally say they want to put her out of her misery, as if they're doing her some kind of kindness and that it's not in the pursuit of their own self-interest. By now, Wolverine knows something's up because Pathfinder is spewing all kinds of garbage about how there's no room left in the world for magical beings like her. Basically, it's that scene where the supervillains reveal their master plan. But Wolverine isn't letting them anywhere near poor Snowbird, and he and Lockheed challenge them to a fight. I'm a little surprised that Lockheed didn't fall under Beastmaster's sway here, but we don't get to see any of the ensuing battle between Wolverine and the scientists, so maybe he did. That would have been a fun little battle to watch, so it's a shame that we didn't get to see at least a peek of it. Ultimately, Wolverine is successful in defeating the scientists, and though he brings Beastmaster back to the palace to show the others, it's said that he apparently killed Pathfinder during the battle. So, after Loki reverses the effects of the spell, I'm not sure if Pathfinder stayed dead or what, but if he did, it's a pretty gruesome end for him. Wolverine is the first character to tell everyone what's up about the fire fountain snuffing out magical beings' lives, and then Lore-Lord reveals that he already knew this information all along, and then everyone starts breaking into their different ideological factions. To their credit, most of the X-Men side with Wolverine, but it's still shocking to see how many characters were okay with Shaman and Snowbird dying. Wolverine is never a favorite character of mine, but I really enjoyed his portrayal in this issue because he showed everyone that he doesn't need his animal side to still be a vicious threat. He used violence when he needed to use violence against the scientists, and then he used reason when it was time to try talking sense into everybody. That just resulted in more violence anyway, but hey, at least he tried.
Loki.
Loki shows his true colors in this issue. In the last issue, it was hinted that Loki had something to do with the sudden appearance of the fire fountain and the subsequent empowerment of the human scientists, but in this issue, it's finally confirmed. He shows himself to the heroes right when the tides have turned against him, and he reveals that he's the one who gifted everybody with their crazy new powers. He says that he's working for the benefit of all humankind, and he can't understand why anyone would reject his gift. Then he sicks his snow giants on them after they refuse him anyway. Loki is his own worst enemy in this issue. He was challenged by those who sit above in shadow to show them that he has the power to change his ways, but he himself doesn't really know what his ways are. These ways are so ingrained within him that even though he thinks he's doing the right thing by forcing the humans to accept a gift that they outright refused, he's actually being treacherous and is trying to enslave them to a reality that they no longer want. Loki has a hard time understanding this about himself, and not even really after the Shadow Gods call him out on it and force him to stop what he's doing does he even understand. They tell him that if he had just humbly accepted the humans' refusal of his gift, then everything would have been hunky-dory. But because he tried to force-feed them, the deal that Loki and the gods struck, whatever it was, is now off, and Loki is banned from ever hurting these mortals again. Loki takes back his gifts at the end of this issue, and everyone is returned to the way they were before the fire fountain ever existed, so that means the scientists are all human again, and the people who were healed through Madelyne's flames, like Sasquatch and Rogue and Aurora and Puck, are all returned to the way they were before too. The trickster god giveth, and the trickster god taketh away. I think Loki is an interesting character here because even though he was totally working in his own self-interest by trying to force his gift upon the humans, it also wasn't him trying to be evil or anything. Sure, the gift had terrible consequences like destroying human creativity and killing magical beings, but it's not as though Loki was hiding those facts. To him, they just weren't really a big deal. Everything with magic comes at a cost, and these seemed acceptable to him for the greater good of world peace. I honestly believe that Loki thought he was doing a good thing by forcing his gift onto the characters. Yes, he was getting something out of it too, but ultimately, I think he really wanted them to have their peace and their joy and their happiness, not because he's invested in their lives or anything, but because he knows that these ideals are something that humans actively crave and strive for, and so bequeathing them, he knows that he's going to be doing everyone a kindness. And it's not very often the trickster god does people a kindness. There are other characters down the road who try to make similar broad sweeping gestures of peace at terrible costs, like Haven in X Factor, and I always think it's an interesting storyline to bring up because it's not like these people are trying to be evil for evil's sake. They just have questionable ethics, and so the heroes usually have to take them out using more than just punches and kicks, and anytime a hero has to use their brain, I enjoy it.
Madelyne Pryor.
Madelyne's an interesting character for me in this issue because I have a hard time knowing exactly what side of the debate she falls on. On the one hand, she's part of the consortium of gifted humans, and I can't quite tell if they haven't been somewhat magically influenced by Loki to gravitate towards being pro-Fire Fountain as opposed to against it like most of the other X-Men are. Not even just because these humans are suddenly experiencing what it's like to be superpowered for the first time in their lives, which is intoxicating in its own right, I'm sure. But it would be weird of Loki to not have some sort of failsafe, like a tiny little suggestion that keeps whispering in the back of their minds with the benefits of their new powers. Otherwise, it feels weird here that Madelyne isn't siding with the anti-Fire Fountain crew, especially since, like, all of her friends are there. In fact, assuming that all the scientists already know the cost of the gift, I find it weird that Madelyne would sneak her way into Wolverine's room and heal him of his berserker rage in the first place. If she was really pro-Fire Fountain, wouldn't she want him to maintain his animal side so that Beastmaster could put him back under his thrall just in case he ever got unruly again, as Wolverine tends to get? The way they describe Madelyne in these panels, it's like she's doing something shady, which I think is initially meant for us to believe that it's something shady against Wolverine and the crew, but it might actually be the opposite, and she could be sabotaging the scientists. Maybe she set Wolverine free on purpose doing this because she knows the cost of the gift and it's just not sitting well with her. She had to sneak into his room when the other scientists couldn't follow her, and then she had to heal him and hope that he was smart enough to follow the breadcrumbs back to Snowbird, which of course he did. I don't know, that's just me thinking that there was more to Maddie than meets the eye here. Her big moment comes during the fight against Loki and the Snow Giants after Laura Lord saves her from a crushing blow and he ends up being mortally wounded himself. By this time, Madelyne has already denounced Loki's gift, so when she goes to heal Laura Lord, nothing happens and she's forced to make a choice. She can either let him die in front of her, or she can take Loki back up on his offer and willingly become his pawn. She decides to accept Loki's deal, and so she's able to heal Laura Lord, but she realizes that she's just sold her soul in the process. Loki's gift is all about the degeneration of the human spirit, and Madelyne verbalizes it well. By obtaining her true heart's desire, which was, I guess, to be of like equal level to the other X-Men and add value to the world in a truly beneficial way, it didn't matter that she'd lose part of herself in the process. Luckily, those who sit above in shadow intervene and Madelyne's humanity is saved, but it was still an interesting turn of events to watch Madelyne, of all characters, to have to make such an extreme choice with Loki. I guess she had been around Cyclops long enough by this point to have his selflessness imprinted on her, so really, I guess there was no other option than for Madelyne to choose the side of self-sacrifice.
Cyclops and Rachel.
One of the underlying subplots of this miniseries is Cyclops and Rachel's relationship, or more so, lack thereof. This is Rachel's first time meeting Cyclops in this reality, and even though she begged her friends not to tell him that she's his daughter from another timeline, she can't help but still feel sensitive to situations concerning him, like when she hears that he's going to be giving birth to a bouncing baby boy. Rachel's emotions have been pretty raw ever since she first arrived in this timeline, and she has been known to lash out with her powers anytime she gets heated. She doesn't really have a great sense of finesse over her mental abilities yet, and she can often be as much a hindrance as well as an asset in these early days when she's not in control. I actually thought that she was the one who caused the cave-in at the start of the issue because she was just so worked up, and I assumed that it was her powers sparking out of control again. I thought that would have been a good storytelling technique for her character, but then it turned out to be Rock Shaper who was just trying to kill them, which I guess is even better storytelling. Cyclops is oblivious to Rachel's lineage all issue long, and it's not until the end of the issue where the subplot finally circles back around and gives Cyc and Rachel some alone time. The gang is ready to depart, but Rachel isn't on the plane, so Cyc has to go out and look for her, and he finds her planting like a psychic flower or something inside the Golden Palace. They manage to bond a bit, and the entire time it's like a game of will she, won't she, as Rachel ponders whether or not to tell Cyclops the truth about where she comes from and who she is. In the end, she decides not to tell him, and she wants instead for him to enjoy his current state of happiness with Madelyne and the soon-to-be-born baby, instead of burdening him with the bleakness of her own future. Even though there's still a tinge of sadness surrounding Rachel during this scene, there's also a legitimate beacon of hope and relief that sparks within her, and it feels like this is the first time she's really come alive since traveling into this timeline.
Rogue and Northstar.
Rogue and Northstar continue their uneasy bonding in this issue. It's more of the same of what happened last issue, with Rogue being extremely empathetic to Northstar and constantly reaching out with olive branches that are rejected and dismissed until they aren't. Rogue has her work cut out for her with this guy, and bless her heart for keeping on trying. There's a cute moment of Rogue in a pretty dress where she asks Northstar if he wants to dance, and at first he refuses, but then after he's teased and goaded by Sasquatch, he agrees and takes her up on it. Even though it feels like Northstar is just dancing with her out of, like, I don't know, arrogant pride or something, it's really nice to watch Rogue feel so happy and free and just see her laugh and enjoy herself. She's getting everything she's asked for, which is total control of her mutant abilities, and so watching her experience this state of bliss is just really blissful for us, the reader, in itself to watch and enjoy. When the heroes start to measure their ideologies, Rogue is one of the few people who benefited from the fire fountain that decides to reject the gift. Even though she loves being able to touch other people, she's of the mind that the cost is just far too great, and she's willing to go back to being untouchable before she'd ever sacrifice the innocent lives of Snowbird and Shaman. It's a similar situation for Northstar. Even though he's the arrogant little priss of the team, he still knows right from wrong, and he'd be essentially murdering his teammates if he went along with the fire fountain gang. I think it pains him to make this decision, though, because really the only person he actually cares for on Alpha Flight is his sister Aurora, and seeing her mind healed and whole is like all he really cares about here. So to side with the faction that wants to take that away from her just goes to show how much of a well-to-do individual Northstar actually is, even if he chooses to portray himself as a stuck-up snob.
Colossus.
Colossus really surprised me in this issue. I know that the writers had to find some way to split the group up when it came to the competing philosophies, but I was genuinely shocked to hear Peter say the things he did. I guess the way the writers positioned his stance makes sense though. Instead of going Colossus the autist route, they went Colossus the Russian, and used his history of having lived in poverty on his farm as like a motivator to want to see the world experience the peace that Loki's gifts promises. It's reason enough, but again, I wonder if part of him might have been controlled by Loki. He was one of the few who were touched by cornucopia, and maybe when she altered his garments, she altered a bit of his mind too. That theory doesn't really stack up when others who were touched by Loki's gift also didn't side with him, like Rogue and Cyclops and Wolverine. But then I look at the people who were pro-Fire Fountain, and the majority of those were people who were blessed by the gift, like Colossus and Aurora and Sasquatch and Puck. So maybe these characters just have like a weaker constitution than the others, and they were more easily swayed by Loki's psychic meddling. I mean, it wouldn't be Colossus's first time being a victim to some emotional tampering. He did fall head over heels for Zaji the moment he met her during Secret Wars, and I'm still not unconvinced that there wasn't at least partially some form of emotional control involved there. So perhaps Peter is just way too sensitive to ever be trusted in these kinds of situations, and he'll always be taken advantage of.
The Scientists.
I was really happy to see the scientists at work in this issue. They represent the extreme side of peaceful governance in this story, where the needs of many outweigh the needs of a few to the point that they are willing to commit murder to have their way. We see it happen multiple times, not just in their philosophy, but also in their actions. We see it when Rockshaper causes the cave-in to try to bury Talisman, Rachel, and Kitty as they start to uncover the truth with the Golden Palace. I mean, we didn't actually see Rockshaper create the cave-in, but it's implied that she was the one who did it by the way her energy is so depleted in the next page. Then we also see Pathfinder and Beastmaster say outright that they are here to put Snowbird out of her misery and kill her. It makes me wonder, if the scientists have no problem with killing off those who they think are meddling in their plans for world peace, then can Madelyne really not heal Shaman, or is she faking it? I don't want to throw Maddie under the bus here, but she is in league with these scientists, and even though she says her powers aren't working on healing Shaman, isn't there a chance that she's just lying here and she wants him to die in order to further the scientists' agenda? Lore himself said that he knew all along what the cost of the gift would be, so if they are all aware of it, then why wouldn't they be working on their own self-interest together? Part of these scientists' journeys, I think, can be bundled up in the power tends to corrupt, but absolute power corrupts absolutely adage. They all have these incredible gifts that they plan to use for the betterment of the world, but anything that doesn't fit into their vision has to be eliminated. And we see just how violent they can get when it comes to achieving their end goal. I really enjoyed the scientists as the antagonizing force in this issue because they weren't just straight up villains. They were people with a misguided vision, and it was really easy to sympathize with at least part of their plight. Of course, everyone wants world peace, but not at the cost of sacrificing creativity, and certainly not at the cost of sacrificing friends' lives.
Panels.
Here are some panels that I found cute or cool or clever from this issue. Number 5, Talisman thinking that her costume looks pretty keen. Girl, that costume is not the one. Get yourself back to the workroom and serve us something elevated. Number 4, Wolverine not backing down to Brawler. I love it when the artists get Wolvie's scale correct. This panel reminds me of an old TV show called The Friendly Giant that would always open with him saying, "Look up, way up," because he was just so tall as giants tend to be. Brawler is the giant in this instance, but friendly? Maybe not. Number 3, Rachel calling Kitty a stupid, meddlesome brat. This is before these two became best friends, so the filter is totally off here, and Rachel is just saying to Kitty what we've all been wanting to say for quite some time. Number 2, Rogue choking out Sasquatch. She's got him in a deadly headlock to the point where his eyes are popping out and he's looking a little bit large Marge. Number 1, my favorite panel in this issue is Snowbird looking disheveled on her deathbed. This is such a heart-wrenching panel for me, and I hate to see Snowbird looking so tragic. The fire fountain's anti-magic effect isn't only affecting her health, but it's also affecting her costume, and she looks like she needs a fairy godmother moment to help pep her back up into shape. My favorite noise in this issue is the cute little zap of Cyclops' optic blast when the heroes start to fight each other. He's shooting out a skinny little beam, so why not give him a skinny little sound effect too?
Fashion.
This issue, I'd like to highlight Kitty's permed hair as my favorite fashion moment. What a look for a 14-year-old girl. Was a tightly permed do like this ever really at the height of fashion? I know Kitty isn't meant to have a keen eye for it, but at this point her fashion sense is just getting ridiculous. My favorite part is when Rachel actually calls her out on it too. After she and Talisman are thrust into a wall, Kitty checks up on them and Rachel calls her by her new nickname, which henceforth is Curly. I love new hairstyle experiments, and I am no stranger to perms myself, but oh man, Kitty should have broken the first cardinal rule of perm maintenance and wet that hair within the first 24 hours after getting her perm to deactivate the ammonium thioglycolate and render those curls not intact.
Ads.
There were no ads again in this issue, except for one at the very back advertising the new Nightcrawler miniseries. I actually have never read this miniseries, but with copy like this pumping it up, how can I possibly resist now? Action that will buckle your swash like it's never been buckled before. I mean, come on. Pirates of the Caribbean got nothing on this fuzzy swashbuckling elf. Well, that's it for this issue. I really enjoyed this X-Men and Alpha Flight miniseries overall, and I think this second issue was the better one of the two. It did a really good job of balancing philosophical rhetoric with exciting mutant action, and really, that's what I'm here for in my X-Men comic books. If you like this review, please feel free to browse my channel for more videos like this one. I also create other videos like rankings and ruminations, so there's definitely something for everyone. I want to thank you for stopping by and sharing your time with me today, and be sure to come back again soon for more Great X-Mentations.